Cloudy, it's going to rain today. Yeah, Alaska is cold. It doesn't
Oh,
get a
pretty
lot
cold.
warmer than
Yeah,
this.
it's 10 degrees Celsius, pretty cold.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't really get lot warmer during summertime than this. This is pretty normal. I mean, because there's still snow in the mountaintop, so it keeps kind of the air kind of cold because it's kind of like a natural refrigerator.
Yeah.
And of course, it's midnight sun here right now. There is no darkness at all. So although it was at 4th of July,
Oh, yeah,
we don't
happy
have.
holiday. It was
Yeah,
two
yeah,
days
thank you.
ago.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't really celebrate it because I'm really a Finn, but yeah, there is no even fireworks over here because it would be too light daylight outside middle of the night, so it wouldn't make any sense to have fireworks. It's a strange place, Alaska. Okie dokie, we have 11 of you here. Welcome. Actually, looks like more, but the number says 11. But anyway, welcome everybody. And yeah, we'll continue on ethics today. I enjoyed your quiz answers. I looked at some of them and I'm going to finish grading them. And many of you talked pretty elegantly about their ethical theories and such. Um, so we'll kind of talk about organizational culture and ethical climate today because it's all about culture. Ethics is not something that you just snap your fingers and all of a sudden people are legally compliant and ethical. It's just a little bit more complicated than that, and it really comes down to um, creating organizational culture that is ethical and moral. And we'll talk about many examples where things have gone bad, and some examples where things have been good in organizations, and how organizations have kind of created that kind of culture. We'll talk about effective ethics policies, ethics reporting mechanism, ethics training program, and safeguards that can be put in place to maintain these kind of ethics. And it's it all starts from policies. I mean, you decide kind of what principles and values you want to follow, and then you establish them as policies, and it becomes sort of the this is how we do things around here kind of a culture of the organization, and then you just make sure that there is consequences for those who don't follow those guidelines and training programs. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then also what are some strengths and weaknesses of a comprehensive ethics program. It's not easy, and one of the problems also is that sometimes if you if organization doesn't already have ethics program and you turn around and start one, it sort of makes people feel like maybe we are being unethical because you are introducing a policy for it, and that maybe we've done something bad. And it's important to remind people that it doesn't mean that it's everybody needs an ethics program, whether or not people are, you know, um, unethical already or not. So it's just a safeguard, and many times it's a legal requirement to have something in place. Um, I can talk about those a little bit because I have some first-hand experiences working as a consultant on those. And then we'll talk about just one topic that you all are kind of familiar with, which is conducting business ethically in a global workplace. So it's always important to go over what are we going to be learning today, and kind of review the learning objectives, because according to a learning theory called constructionism, that's how we learn, when we know in advance what it is that we are about to learn, and then we can reflect on that. Um, so yeah, corporate culture and ethical climates. Of course, organizational culture or corporate culture is kind of like the personality of the organization. It's sort of a blend of ideas, customs, practices, values, all kinds of shared meanings. It's essentially, like I said earlier, this is how we do things around here. That's kind of a and obviously that culture is influenced by, the society's national culture around it, and also the kind of people that work for the organization. But the essence of that culture is that it sort of defines what's normal and what's normal for everybody who works in that company. And I mean, these they seem so trivial, but because we would think that everybody would know what's normal and what's not normal. But the reality is that we don't. Even our society, um, if we think of what's going on today in a society, especially in the United States, we would not have thought that that would be normal at all some 10, 20 years ago. And right now there are things going on that we would never have thought of being normal. So, things change, and our perception of normality changes with that. So it's interesting. Nearly twice as many employees observe misconduct by coworkers in weak ethical cultural companies. So those companies that don't have strong ethics policies and ethical culture, I mean, it's pretty significant. How many more people engage in misconduct, and the reason why it's so important to keep talking about ethics and laws are, as we talked about last time, they are that kind of a conventional level of morality where people just follow the laws just because they are set that way, and they sort of don't question them. And it's not really true morality if we just follow something without questioning it. And true morality kind of originates from our critical thinking of that particular type of behavior, and critically thinking whether or not I should behave this way or that way, and contemplating on consequences, and that's what we want to cultivate. We don't want to cultivate people who are like robots and machines and just follow rules and laws just because it's written so. We want people to understand the essence of ethical and moral behavior, because by the time we have to deal with violations of actual law, it may be too late, because then they may be lawsuits, and they may cost millions of dollars, and it's a really, really bad way of learning negative behavior by getting a lawsuit. So really has to start proactively and not reactively when it's already too late. So the ethical climate is really just an unspoken understanding, basically what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior. And the organization kind of creates those expected standards and norms, and then people just start behaving accordingly. And of course, there are multiple subclimates that can exist in an organization. Different departments or different divisions can have a slightly different kind of climate. Enron is a really good example. The Enron, the oil company. If anybody has time to read a good book, they are, what is it, smartest guys in the room, or smartest, maybe it's like smartest guys in the room or something in the name of the book. And literally talks about their leadership team of Enron and the culture of Enron, and how they somewhat consciously created a culture where everybody just thought that certain things were completely acceptable, and people were so into Enron that they would have tattoos on their hand, on their shoulder, Enron tattoo, Enron logo in their shoulder to show that's their company. And I mean, they went way to a bizarre level of loyalty, and they had all kinds of different sort of activities that they got engaged in that really were not normal. I mean, normal corporations don't have those kind of retreats when they kind of do that kind of bonding, and they did all of that sort of intentionally, so that it gave people a feeling like, if I act and behave exactly like the leadership does and do what they expect me to do, that's normal and okay. And so people just sort of didn't even realize that what they were doing was not okay. It's sort of like um, there's a good movie called Lord of the Flies. It's a movie about one of these old, sail ships, and it gets stranded in a island in the middle of the ocean, and it's like a training ship where all of the crew are little kids, and all of the adults die, and those little kids, they wind up in an island by themselves, and they very quickly end up dividing into two groups of kids and end up actually getting in a war against each other. And so the movie is all about how group of kids who, without adults and without laws, without rules, can break up into chaos and become real primitive and start hurting each other in a very short period of time in absence of adult supervision and those rules around them. And I mean, that can happen to everybody. It can happen to any society, any organization. When people around us act in a certain way, we start looking around and say, well, since they are acting that way, it must be okay. And then we lose our ability to question our behaviors that way. So there are a lot of ethical criteria that people use sort of to reason the climate that they are in. So egoism is kind of one, and self-centered approach. The United States is the most individualistic country in the world. If you look at Hofstede's dimensions of cultural individualism versus collectivism. And so that basically means that in the United States, people are out for themselves more than they are for the team, or, the kind of nationalism or kind of patriotism that we have in United States is that people pretty much in their own, front lawn and say, don't step on my property, don't step on my house. It isn't so much about the country or freedom or democracy or any of those things. It really is more about this is my property, don't step on it, kind of a thing. Self-interest. And many countries in the world, many parts of the world, self-interest is really a big part of it. And organizations, fundamentally, people go to work in organizations to to make money. So focus of individual person is very often self-interest. Of course, the company is trying to focus on the company interest, and then society, of course, is looking at sort of economic efficiency of that organization. Um, there's also benevolence, concern for others approach, which don't agree with that social word. I mean, benevolence means that you don't care. It's that you're benevolent, or you're one way or another, you're kind of indifferent, to something, and so concern for others, together with word benevolence, seems strange to me. But anyway, in organizations that have that type of a criteria or that kind of climate, it's all based on friendship. And of course, organization looks at team interest, kind of collective approach, and society expects social responsibility from those organizations. So very typically, nonprofit organizations would be based on those kinds of criteria. It's very, friendship is very important for people in a nonprofit organization where people don't necessarily work in a nonprofit for their own self-interest. I mean, they can get paid, and they usually do get paid, of course. I mean, sometimes people volunteer for nonprofits, but they join those organizations because of the mission and cause of it, and they stay because of the friendships with other like-minded people who think similar way. And so organization then focuses on that team building because that's essentially their quote unquote magic, the secret sauce that keeps the organization running. And then you have the principle, the personal morality. Again, some nonprofits, you know, people may be working in certain nonprofit organizations because of the personal morality. They care about the cause so much that they join the organization to make a difference. Now, of course, it could be a for-profit organization as well. If there is, the mission of the organization is something that, people really care about. Like for me personally, because I can't really talk about anybody else, education is something that I've always thought been an important value. And so my personal morality of my dedication or commitment to education kind of keeps me, in this field. and so it's just something that, to me, it's my principle that we have to do something good for the world. And I think that education is the most noble thing that we can do. So that's just my personal opinion of morality. And so in organizations who tend to be following principle, company rules and procedures tend to be important. And then, of course, the society laws and professional codes that become important for people like that. So it's interesting. Different departments of organization can have very different set of ethics, if you will. It seems strange, but it's sort of true. I mean, you have certain ethical standards that are created by maybe professional organizations in that field, and sometimes they can be in conflict with each other. Um, Accounting, finances, financial side, marketing, information technology, supply chain. They can be their own professional sort of a mindset about certain principles that are typical to like accountants that may be different for people who are marketers, for example. Human resource management should be included there because HR people have very strong set of principles, and mostly those principles are set by Society for Human Resource Management and not so much the organization that these HR professionals work for. So interestingly, my wife wrote her dissertation about faculty engagement, and what she found is that faculty were not as engaged towards the organization, the university they were working for, but they were much more engaged towards their discipline. So, I mean, that's a good example of how it's really the professional ethics of that particular function, profession, that dictate how people behave more than the organization's ethics. So accountants follow the universal accounting standards. Financial, people, they follow Sarbanes-Oxley and other regulations because that's important to them in their field, etc., etc. So I'm not an accountant, so I can't really relate on accounting ethics, but obviously we expect accountants to be ethical, and we expect them to be able to file financial records that can be audited and certified. And so there are obviously managerial accountants, and then there are public accountants. So managerial accountants put together those reports, and then the public accountants will audit them and certify them. So there is sort of a certain set of principles that has to be followed, in all of those. So responsibilities, public interest, integrity, objectivity, due care, all of those are, important for accountants. And obviously there's sometimes conflict with self-interest because, accountants have to look at the goodness of the all and not so much what they get out of it. So you have financial people, financial ethics, really responsibilities of managing firms' assets and raising capital. There are many, many different cases of scandals that have taken place about financial people evading taxes and manipulating treasury markets. A lot of other similar kinds of things. You've heard about probably a lot of those. The Bitcoin issues, cryptocurrency. A lot of ethical issues there because there's really no regulation, and so there's a lot of I don't know, questionable ethics, in a world where money only matters, and there's huge pressure on people to make that money. And the more pressure you put on people, more likely they are to violate certain ethical guidelines because they feel that, well, money matters more than anything. Greed is a powerful motivation, and they lose their sight of what really is, right and what's wrong. Just many movies out there, examples, the Wolves of Wall Street, and many other ones out there talk about this very idea. Marketing. I mean, people in marketing have their own set of ethics, what's right, what's wrong, and sometimes they can be questionable. I mean, marketers may think that it's okay to use subliminal messages, for example, because their goal is to, at all costs, to get people to buy products. And many other people will say, well, that's invasive and intrusive to use subliminal messaging, and most markets, most countries in the world, that's those would be illegal types of advertising. So marketers have to ask themselves what's ethical, in distributing and selling products and services, advertising them. I mean, marketing is all about conceptualizing a product, and how we get people to conceptualize the product. There's so many opportunities for wrongdoings there, and sometimes marketers look at them very differently than the rest of the folks. They may think that certain tactics and things are completely okay, whereas we may not necessarily think so. I mean, just think of examples like when you go to grocery store, the shopping cart that you are using has a microtransmitter. So the marketers can track where you take that shopping cart, which aisles you stop. They can measure or analyze because they know exactly what products are in what aisles. And so by evaluating, analyzing the movements of your movements in a grocery store, they can come up with better ways to get you to buy things. Malls, shopping malls, they pump oxygen into the air inside the malls because oxygen makes you feel kind of excited, and so you get kind of a natural high, and now you get excited. You think that products are cool because you get excited about it, so you need to buy more. Those kinds of things. I mean, how do you feel about it? I mean, does anybody have any thoughts about those kind of marketing techniques? BMW used in Europe at one point. They had in the middle of beginning of a movie in a movie theater, they flashed just one split second. They flashed images BMW and white letters in a black screen, and for a few minutes after that, in your retina, in your eyes, you would glow BMW, and you wouldn't really recognize what that flash was. But then after that, you would see the after glow in your eyes, and the regulators caught up on that pretty quickly. But I mean, what do you think about those kind of intrusive marketing techniques? Does anybody have any thoughts or opinions? Also, finance or accounting, if you have any thoughts about maybe examples of ethical guidelines that you know about. Any thoughts, anybody? Anybody? Nothing? Am I talking too fast, or maybe you're already sleeping? I had my cup of coffee, and maybe that's why I'm talking so fast. So that's okay, no problem. So in marketing, issues that we usually face are issues of consumer privacy, honesty, and transparency. And marketers may think that certain things are okay. Statistics. There is a good book from early 50s, 1952. There's a book called How to Lie with Statistics, and it kind of shows how statistics can be used in advertising to misrepresent things. That technically the statistics that are being shown are truthful, but they are misleading to the point that a person, reading it gets a completely different idea. And so many claims in marketing are used by embellishing or representing something from a certain angle so that it looks a certain way. There are YouTube collected personal data from children, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those portals, social media portals, really do use lots of those kinds of, well, I mean, every time you turn your computer on, obviously, whether you click on the internet, the algorithm will read it and use that to, sell you stuff. And so when you start seeing banner ads customized just for you, that's because you essentially, with your behavior, told it. And same thing, Facebook algorithms will analyze everything. So the level of invasiveness and consumer privacy, it's hard to even concept, for us to even understand how much information is being collected by marketers all the time and how many ethical issues there are. If we really start thinking about it, we would be horrified. What marketers think that are okay to do. But generally speaking, American Marketing Association says, do no harm, foster trust, embrace ethical values. Not sure if marketers, entirely follow all of those rules always, but that's the idea at least. Information technology, obviously, there's a whole set of issues with that. What we can do versus what we should or should not do are two different things. We have many opportunities to invade somebody's privacy. In IT, we can collect and store and access personal and business information. Hackers can hack it at will. Obviously, it's pretty clear. Well, it's not necessarily, but I mean, we think that it's pretty clear, what actions, are bad morality or, bad and, illegal. But then there are many kind of borderline issues, that, we may be thinking about, is this okay? Is this not okay? And with artificial intelligence, AI will read everything that internet ever have about you. And so if you ask AI to write a report on a person, they'll pull all of this information that is available in the dark corners of internet. And just because somebody put it out there doesn't mean that it should be used against you, but it can very much happen that way. So medical information, for example, and I'm talking just United States system here, medical providers, they are bound by their own medical ethics to, let's just talk about mental health. So mental health providers, when you go to a therapist or psychiatrist, they are bound by the rules of their own industry. So, American Psychological Association forbids them to disclose information, about their clients or anything that happens in therapy. And so now let's just say that, your psychiatrist diagnoses you to have schizophrenia. And, because often what happens is that you may actually only have adjustment disorder with some psychotic, episodes. But the psychiatrist wants to get insurance reimbursement for it. And so they beef up the diagnosis, give you a stronger, more serious diagnosis that would be actually warranted just so that the insurance company would pay the benefits. Well, now the insurance company, you are signing a waiver, for the insurance, for the doctor to release information to the insurance company. And those insurance companies are following their industry's ethics that are not as strict that the ethics of psychiatrists, and psychology as a field would be. And so now we have expectations that none of that information would leak, would not be released in anywhere in the internet. But in reality, insurance companies can sell information to other insurance companies and, to benefit from the information that they collected. And so now you go to a job interview and somebody pulls a background report. For $20, you can run a report on almost anybody, and they'll get pretty comprehensive data on person. And so now all of a sudden, part of that report shows that you have schizophrenia. And so now you don't get offered the job because, your hiring manager doesn't feel so safe about schizophrenia. And so think about it. You went to therapist to look for help. You were overdiagnosed in order to, for you to get reimbursed by insurance company, and now you can't get a job because of that. Those kinds of things happen all the time. And, because information technology and the way information is stored gets leaked, intentionally sometimes unintentionally. So invasions of privacy occur all the time. Our data is stored, in many, many places, data that we really don't want to leak. So it is something that we should be worried about. Also, copyright protection. Famously, the musician, artist Prince, famously fought against his rights to own his own music and intellectual property. It gets really, really tricky today because you can download almost anybody's music for free, and so the artists don't get paid for their work anymore, and so the kind of copyright issues become really, really tricky. Any kind of creative material, books written by people can be easily scanned by somebody for free on the internet, and next thing you know, the artists and the writers have no claim to it because it's already spread out. Movies, same thing. They get pirated all the time, and movie companies, they lose a lot of money because of those things. So, and then you have cyberbullying, which is a serious thing. There are people committing suicides because they are bullied in link and some Facebook or Instagram or something like that. I mean, people just, it's becoming some serious problems there. So information technology has created ethical dilemmas that we are just starting to understand. I mean, Google and Amazon, the type of information that they collect on us. And of course, in Europe, those regulations are tighter than they are in US. So some of these American companies have gotten in trouble in Europe about that. And I think that this is going to be an area where we're going to have more and more issues going forward with artificial intelligence. There is just no telling, what kind of profiles, can be generated on any one of us out there. We should be lucky, though, when you think about it in a Western world. Obviously, at least there's some protections. China, for example, they freely, the government collects information on people on internet, and they give them a social score, whatever it is called. And I mean, the entire futures are linked to the data that the government collects, and so some parts of the world obviously are more concerning than others. Supply chain, um, you know, just think about where raw materials come from. Cobalt, for electric vehicle batteries, although not all of them use cobalt anymore, but it gets mined by child workers, in certain parts of the world. There are all kinds of products produced that gets picked up by immigrants for less than minimal pay in the field out there. Some companies like Starbucks, they've taken a stand on that. Starbucks, they've gone to their farmers and said, we'll buy your coffee beans for fair trade value if you sell only to us and not to the coffee cartels, who are almost illegal operations, subject people to slavery-like conditions. So the ethics involved in supply chain, using child labor, um, forcing people in poverty to work in bonded labor situations. I mean, there are all kinds of issues associated with the supply chain. And so that's an area where we really need to be aware and sort of educate ourselves as customers also, and not buy products that don't meet these kind of ethical standards, because it's pretty serious. So luckily, internet helps us to research some of the backgrounds of some of these companies. So ironically, IT is an issue for us, but it's also an issue for companies who can keep the ethical practices hidden necessarily, or unethical practices. So how do we build these safeguards? The best way is to change the culture, so that the ethics really become part of the daily decision making. I mean, just countries' culture, same thing. I mean, some countries have a lot of corruption and bribery, and then some other countries don't, because the culture around it kind of forbids that. And so in a very similar kind of way in organizations, if organization fosters these kind of positive interactions and positive ways of making decisions, they have typically more ethical environments. Southwest Airlines is a classic one. I've always liked them as a company. They started in law field in Texas, Houston, I think, or Dallas, no, maybe Dallas. And so they got the idea from that to use heart as a symbol, for the airline. And from that point on, everything that they did, they associated that somehow with themes of love and caring for each other. And so when they hand peanuts, their love bits, and they tell stories about how employees have helped customers in their website, so they really celebrate those kinds of things. They take care of their employees. There's videos out there where the founder, Herb Kelleher, would have corporate parties with employees and thank them for what they're doing, and really take care of the employees. And so by doing that and creating that kind of a culture, Southwest Airlines was for a long time won the Triple Crown Award in airline industry, many years in a row. Now they have sort of fallen apart since then. We do hear unethical things like pilot being drunk or something like that occasionally. And I mean, of course, they happen in all airlines, but we have heard Southwest Airlines failing as well. So that just goes to show that even the best of the best organizational cultures, there are sometimes situations where, they just can't maintain it. Something starts changing. So, building those ethical safeguards and kind of for everyday routines so that people remember them is not easy. I mean, you can do the compliance-based approach, but you can enforce people only to a certain point. Just because people comply with your rules doesn't mean that they agree with your rules. They comply with them because they have to, because they would lose their jobs if they wouldn't. And those compliance-based cultures, they emphasize the threat of detection and punishment. And ultimately, people don't like that. Ultimately, people don't like to be living under threat and under punishment. And so they leave because they want the ethical thinking to be a free choice. And so integrity-based approach where you combine concern for law with employee responsibility. You educate people about their law and about the ethical expectations in a way that people understand why they are following the law, rather than just, I told you so, or you do this or that because I tell you to. They understand, let's say, okay, well, I understand why, why should I not speed on the road? Well, because it's dangerous for other fellow, drivers. And if everybody would be speeding like I'm speeding, it would be chaotic on a highway and people would get in accidents. So when we can reason some of those rules and understand that there's a reason for them that is actually helping all of us. And by accepting that, we live in a better society. So same way in organizations, if we follow the rules, it's good for everybody. So really promoting the acting with integrity and conducting business with honesty and fairness is really the goal, that we sort of socialize people to think that way, and educate people to internalize this idea that it's better to be honest and better to deal with people fairly, because if we don't, eventually that's going to come back and haunt us. Obviously, compliance-based approaches work. Forcing people to be compliant do work short term, but long term, it's really better to use the integrity-based approach. So by both of the approaches work, but different ways. And I would argue that integrity-based approach on long term is way superior. Ethical leadership, to me, that's an oxymoron. Not an oxymoron, but it's self-obvious. All good leadership is ethical leadership. There is no leadership that is not ethical. I mean, I've once taught a leadership course in a university in a classroom setting, and I started. I used to always do that in a leadership class. I used to start the class asking people, who their favorite leaders were, and this time everybody had their turn in a round robin kind of form, and this one person said, "Well, my favorite leader is Adolf Hitler." Well, you can imagine the classroom, they looked at him and say, "What is going on? That's a crazy answer." And so he said, "Well, it's, he was, genius, that he was, great leader because he was able to get so many people to follow him. And so, I mean, it has to be recognized that it took some leadership skill." And I said, "Well, sir, let's think about this a little bit." I said, "First of all, think about the consequences. One man's actions resulting in 60 million people dying. How can that be in any manner be considered a positive outcome of somebody's leadership?" So certainly, based on consequences and outcomes, Hitler would not be a good leader. And also his own outcome. I mean, his own leadership, caused himself to be, him to kill himself. So it didn't work out for him from self-interest perspective either, and it certainly did not work for Germany as a country, and certainly did not work for the world. So, I mean, there's no way that anybody can say that Hitler was a good leader. And so it goes to illustrate that ethics and good leadership go hand in hand. You cannot look at any leader in the history, that acted unethically and turn around and say that they were good leaders. So that's what our discussion was about. And, it's first only time that I've ever heard, a student saying that was pretty bold, but I understood where he was coming from, but he was also wrong. The leadership sets the tone. Whoever is the leader sets the tone of the organization. It's the tone at the top. People tend to follow the leader. And if the leader sanctions certain behavior, people tend to think that it's sort of okay. And so, that's sometimes leaders underestimate, their own influence, and don't really realize how much people do actually follow. I wrote my dissertation on Coca-Cola Corporation case study, and I studied three different generations of leadership: Asa Candler, Robert Woodruff, and Roberto Coisuera. And they set completely different expectations for the company for each of those times. And the tone of the culture and tone and culture of the company changed dramatically, because of the leader in charge. And so you can study those in many companies. Disney is a good one. Eisler's leadership has really, really changed, transformed the company. And so also Starbucks under Schmidt has really, really been a different company that under anybody. So, goes on and on. Southwest Airlines with Herb Kelleher, I mean, it's a leader that defined the company and the culture and the ethics. And when that leader retired, things started kind of falling apart. So, really, leadership is really critical to fostering that ethical behavior. And then, of course, those ethics programs and policies. If the leader has certain principles, really believes in them, and sets policies and programs to support those principles, then that becomes kind of institutionalized and becomes systematic. And Southwest Airlines is a really good example of that. 3M's code of conduct is a very good example as well. Some companies go as far as like Nordstrom. Nordstrom's employee handbook has 3 words. Use your best judgment. Actually, that's probably 4 words. But anyway, one sentence. Use your best judgment is the employee handbook. But obviously, they don't leave it to people freely to use their own judgment. They obviously have training programs that people follow pretty closely, and they select people according to certain criteria. So it's not accidental at all. But these policies and codes, they're kind of like laws, I guess. They act as guidance to managers and employees so that they can solve ethical dilemmas a certain way. Many policies are instrumental. They provide rules and procedure. At least in the US, we tend to try policies to be, specific as to what the procedure is and how you should implement that policy. In Japan, policies tend to be, combination of legal compliance and company values, because they're collective society. People are looking at these things more collectively, so you don't have to spell out how do you act. There is more of an understanding of those things, so they tend to emphasize their values and legal compliance over that, and then people are able to follow through. These ethics programs, they have to be widely distributed and associated with ethics training. So, if you want people to be ethical, don't expect people to fall in line by themselves. You have to literally train people to do that. That's very important. Well, let's have a break. I just noticed it's at 9:47. So let's have a 15-minute break, then come back and and again, at any minute, if you have something to say, if you have an opinion about what we are talking about, feel free to share. It doesn't have to be just me talking, but I'll keep yapping if nobody else wants to yap. So let's get back here in 15 minutes and continue. Thank you. Is everybody back? Cool. Thanks, Rafa.
Yes, Professor, yes. We are here.
We are here.
Sounds cool. Thank you. Do you have any questions at this point? Anybody, any thoughts or questions? I know these are, topics that, is maybe, hard to, talk about because, we don't want to put our companies that we work for in a bad light or anything like that. So, but I wonder if anybody has any positive examples of any companies that you have worked for that have done some good ethics programs or trainings that you really enjoyed or thought that were beneficial.
Actually, it's another point, just to kind of questioning. I think this lecture is enriched with points which we can choose from them for the final course paper. Is it what you mean?
Right.
And so that's good. So we can choose one of them and we can excavate it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Yeah, this is, I think this chapter is important because it's one thing to talk about ethics and laws in sort of principles and broad concepts, but we have to understand how to go ahead and implement them, how to put them in practice, so that they are not just these broad, generic abstracts that we actually concretely know what they mean to us day to day. And it wasn't always a straightforward, 50s, 60s, 70s even. There were lots of companies that took advantage of their employees, and because there was no internet or really any, there were newspapers and radio, but these things did not really get into public eye. And so unionization started growing, obviously, with Jimmy Hoffa and all of those Teamsters and at that era where all of that became well known. And that was just because there were so much things happening, so many wrongdoings by companies. And so, unions tried to, improve the conditions. And so it really wasn't until sort of 80s, 1980s, that this idea of ethics in a workplace and corporations started becoming more emphasized. So companies started creating these ethics and compliance officer roles. It's kind of controversial because we now also, our kind of today's world, we are going kind of the next level of that. And now there are lots of these diversity officers, because we've taken ethics to the level of now really focusing on specific issues, and diversity has become a top topic. And especially, in California, lots of companies now have these diversity offices, and they're obviously very positive and good in creating more equality and fairness. But also, there are problem with these offices, and same thing with ethics and compliance officers, is that when you go look for unethical behaviors, you'll find it. And so sometimes there are overpassionate officers who are they create issues in where they are not by overemphasizing them. So you also have to be kind of careful in these policies and in these ways you enforce them, that you also kind of look at them reasonably, that sometimes people do make mistakes, and innocent mistake versus intentional wrongdoing are two different things. And you don't want to create an environment of fear where people are so afraid to say or do something because they don't know if it's ethically right or wrong, that it actually becomes a negative thing in itself. So, there's a certain way of doing things. And of course, the professional associations like ECOA, they do emphasize the normal, healthy, and positive ways of doing, implementing these policies and training programs. And it really started peaking in memberships, between 2000 and 2004 and thereon, when really these ethical, issues started to be in the forefront of a lot of corporate issues. So, we've seen kind of steady movement up from the 80s to early 2000s, and really kind of skyrocketing from there, how ethics have becoming an important thing. And of course, when you start looking at the scandals that we all know about and when they occurred, there's really obviously correlation there. More scandals became known by people, more these ethical issues really started concerning companies, and so they started implementing these offices. They also have these reporting mechanisms. Many big corporations have helplines or hotlines to provide interpretations of proper ethical behavior, so that people can call and say, what should I do here? Here's my dilemma, situation this or that way. And of course, most commonly, they are used for reporting unethical behavior. If you observe somebody doing something, whether it's targeted at you or somebody else, you can call and say, I witnessed unethical behavior, and you can confidentially make that known. And of course, provide information sharing tools for employees and stakeholders. education is always the best way of going about it. It's kind of like academic honesty that universities talk about, trying to prevent plagiarism. You get much more by promoting ethical academic culture and promoting academic honesty than you do by talking about dishonesty and talking about plagiarism. You know, you get much more with the carrot than with the stick. And so education, proactive education is always better long term. Interestingly, executives tend to use these hotlines more than middle managers, which just shows that executives are more involved in ethical decision making and those kinds of issues, and they think about these things a lot, and so they often reach out to get somebody's opinion on what they should or should not do, what they observe and what kind of things, maybe their own decisions or reflecting on how they should react to somebody else's decisions, etc. So these training programs, they're expensive, of course. Training is always expensive. You often have to hire an expert, and ethics programs are better done face to face when there is actually some reflection and discussion going on. And so they are the most expensive and time-consuming element of an ethics program. It's easy to write policy. It's easy to write procedures and list your corporate values and principles, but to actually systematically figure out how to train people on them, it's much more difficult. And then to evaluate the impact of the training and effectiveness of the training is difficult because these values have been ingrained into us from our childhood. So, if the values training that you are trying to implement and the values that you are trying to change, in some way of contradicting what you have learned in sort of your childhood, they will be very difficult. Behavior is very difficult to change. Attitudes are very difficult to change. They are the ABCs of attitude formation, affect, behavior, or cognition. And so it doesn't happen just by, somebody giving you a PowerPoint slide and saying, this is how you should behave. It takes a lot more than that. Small and medium businesses are more likely to offer training, obviously, in alignment with regulatory guidelines. In other words, small and medium businesses are very sensitive to regulatory pressures, and they certainly, dog hair in my mouth, they certainly have to be more focused on those. Typically, larger companies have gotten over, they regulatory compliance is already sort of established. So now they have some different issues that they can deal with, a little bit higher level issues. And so these are just some of the benefits, that organizations have reported. Obviously, reducing legal liability is the number one goal. I mean, that's really why you want to train people on these things. And, you want to increase reporting and speaking up. And that, training increases that, improves trust in leadership, improves employee morale, and then improves mastery of ethics and compliance issues. So all of these are important, but of course, first and foremost, you want to avoid lawsuits, and that's why you emphasize these things. Global economy, there are many complex ethical challenges. Bribery, for example, is we talked about this before, but it's just in some countries it's a normal way of doing things, and there are subtle ways of bribing people that don't even look like bribery. I mean, these are elaborate corporate gifts. Somebody gives somebody a golf club membership for 1 year that is worth tens of thousands of dollars. Well, that's bribe. That's not just a gift. The goal of that gift is to influence somebody to do business with you, and is a fine line of what you consider to be a gift or a bribery. I mean, in the United States, there's a lot of wining and dining, elaborate corporate events that certainly can be taken as bribes. Pharmaceutical companies were known at some point taking physicians, doctors out to these elaborate conferences that really turned out to be paid vacations. And so they went there in a spirit of being educated about that medicine, when in reality they were wined and dined and lobbied to use that medicine, with their patients. So, bribery isn't always obvious, but in some countries it obviously is very much part of the way it's done. There are some international, watchdogs, Transparency International, that publishes a survey of countries' levels of corruption. That survey, I mentioned before that, my home country, Finland, is number one, meaning least corrupted country in the world, that has the least amount of bribery. And I mean, not trying to make it sound like Finland is a promised land, that everything is great there, but in terms of value systems, in terms of honesty, people do, if you lose your wallet there, you're pretty much certain to find it. People will not touch it. They take it to, lost and found. In the United States, unfortunately, if you lose your wallet in New York City, you're not going to find it again. And very unlikely that it's going to be returned to you. So, there's just, are differences in ethics like that. So obviously those corporate ethics, the society's ethics, then they kind of, also reflect in corporations. So New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, Switzerland, Singapore, and Sweden are considered to be very, very little corruption, less corrupted. And then Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and Venezuela considered to be, highly corrupted in terms of their Transparency International. It's complicated. It's not just a matter of right or wrong. It's just the way country sort of operates. And in many of these countries that Transparency International considers to be highly corrupted, would not consider their behavior to be corrupted. It's just the way of the culture, the gift giving and whatever. It's just the way things are done. So just because one organization say that this is bad, this is good, doesn't mean that necessarily. It's not that straightforward. So how do you curtail these unethical practices? You learn about your practices. Surveying. They always said if you want to improve something, start measuring it. So when you start surveying these things and paying attention, then people start being more ethical because they don't want their bad behavior to be detected. You have U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, United Kingdom's Bribery Act, anti-bribery law in Brazil, India, and Mexico. So, a lot of countries have their own. And, we could evaluate effectiveness of those. That would be a good paper topic, to think about some of these agencies and effectiveness of what they do. There's a lot of room for improvement, and these are certainly not straightforward issues. So organizations, culture, and ethical work, climate definitely play a central role in encouraging employees to act ethically. Like I said, Enron and other bad players like that, people in many cases were completely unaware that they were doing something unethical, because they said, look, we were told to do this, everybody was doing it, so it must have been okay to do. And they were stunned to find out that it wasn't okay, which I feel is pretty naive. But considering that most people out there are conventional in the level of moral development and sometimes pre-conventional, they're not exactly operating according to universal ethical principle. So they are easily convinced, easily influenced to do unethical things without even realizing what they're doing. Unfortunately, that's how people are. And, the famous movie Few Good Men, even a military setting, how Marines were willing to implement Code Red and not even realize that it's a obviously wrong thing. It's bullying. It's a wrong thing to do. And so yeah, I mean these complicated issues. So that's all I have in terms of the slides. Any thoughts? Anybody? Does anybody have any ideas and thoughts about these things that you want to share? If not, we don't have enough time for a second sort of chapter here, but we will start speeding up a little bit, you know, to towards the end. I mean, we are roughly, I think, in a midpoint right now of the course of the class. So we'll start, you know, going through. It's not necessary that we have to cover every single chapter in a book, but you know, when I'm done traveling, we have, you know, we can catch up a little bit because you know, last week and today, you know, we've left a little bit earlier. So if you don't have any questions, that's all that I have for you today. I will rate your quizzes and then start looking forward to the course paper, and I've reopened them for those who missed them for some reason. So you know, no worries there. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. Wherever you are, enjoy the hotness. It won't last. And so if you have any questions, you know how to reach me.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Professor. Bye.